The wind swept through the dust-blown plains of central Wyoming, whistling across the wooden beams of the neglected cattle auction yard. The sky was a hard-baked dome of pale blue, the sun unrelenting, casting long shadows of men in wide-brimmed hats gathered near the weathered stage. Most of them had come for cattle or horses. None expected what happened next. Caleb Wren didn't plan to attend the auction. He never did, not anymore. His cattle grazed where they pleased, and his business stayed quiet and self-contained, just as he liked it. He hadn't set foot in town for months, preferring the company of his dogs, his horse, and the endless rhythm of land that asked for nothing but honest work. That morning, he rode in for a spare part to fix a busted windmill. That's all it was supposed to be, until the crowd and the shouts pulled him in. A makeshift platform had been erected outside the saloon. The crowd's tone wasn't like any livestock trade Caleb had heard. There was unease under the laughter. Curiosity edged with disgust. And then he saw her. The girl couldn't have been more than 19. She stood barefoot on the wooden platform, dress clinging to her like wet muslin, stomach swollen in the unmistakable shape of late pregnancy. Her hair was tangled but thick, the color of polished chestnut. She stared forward, not down, not at the crowd, not even at the angry, red-faced woman who stood beside her, shouting prices as if she were auctioning a mule. "This here's my daughter, Iris May," the woman shrieked. "She's strong-bodied, knows how to clean, how to cook, and she's carrying a child. Some lucky soul's already done half the work for you." The men laughed nervously. One spat into the dust. Another murmured, "Ain't this illegal?" But no one stepped forward. Caleb didn't move at first. His boots felt nailed to the earth. The sun gleamed off the silver on his belt buckle. Something burned in his throat. The girl, Iris, shifted her weight slightly. Her arms cradled her belly, her face unreadable. Not ashamed, not broken, just tired. So goddamn tired. "Starting at $20, the mother yelled. A full-grown girl and a babe-to-be, clean blood, no sickness, no law after her. "Well, give me 20. No one answered. A few men peeled away. One man let out a low whistle, then shook his head and walked off. The sheriff? Nowhere in sight. Probably looking the other way, like most folks around here did when the truth got ugly. And then Caleb stepped forward. He said nothing as he walked up to the platform, dust curling around his boots. His horse stood a few paces behind him, black as pitch, patient. The woman's eyes lit up. You look like you got land. Got hands. You want her?" Caleb looked at Iris. Still, she didn't flinch. Her eyes finally met his. Wide, gray, endless. He could see pain in them, yes, but also something sharper. A sliver of steel. She had not gone quietly into whatever hell had brought her here. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman answered, "I told you, she's Iris." "I wasn't asking you," Caleb said, voice quiet but flat with authority. The woman bristled. Iris blinked, then said in a voice softer than a whisper, "Iris May. Do you want to leave with me?" he asked her. A pause. Then slowly she nodded. "Once." He turned to the woman, unbuckled the small pouch of coins from his belt, and handed it over without counting. "Here's your 20. But make no mistake, this girl's not yours anymore. You come near her again, I'll put you in the ground." The woman sputtered, but Caleb had already turned, stepping up onto the platform and reaching out a hand to Iris. She looked at it a moment, uncertain. Then she placed her hand in his, and he helped her down as if she were something fragile, a rare crystal artifact covered in prairie dust. The crowd scattered with whispers and side-eyes. No one stopped them. They rode back to the ranch in silence, Iris behind Caleb on the saddle. She didn't cry. She didn't talk. She clung to the horn of the saddle and stared out across the miles of wheat-colored land, her belly brushing his back. The Wren Ranch sat on nearly 100 acres of open country, tucked between pine-covered hills and sagebrush flats. It was modest, weathered barns, a 2-story house with creaking porch boards, and an old chicken coop Caleb hadn't bothered to rebuild since the foxes got through 2 winters ago. He dismounted and helped Iris down. She looked at the house like it was a trick, too quiet, too still. Caleb didn't touch her as she looked around. "This place is yours as long as you want it to be," he said. I won't ask questions. You don't owe me anything. The room upstairs gets good light. I'll bring in water and fresh linens. You need food, you let me know. You don't feel safe, you say so. She nodded, but said nothing. He pointed her toward the door, and she walked up the porch slowly, hand resting on her belly. Caleb stayed outside, watching the sunset bleed across the sky like spilled blood over linen. The first few weeks passed like molasses in winter, slow, dense, full of silence. Iris rarely spoke. She stayed in the upstairs room, sitting by the window most hours. Caleb brought her meals, clean clothes, and gave her space. They didn't share meals. He figured she needed room to figure out whether this was a place of safety or just another holding pen. At night, he'd hear her moving. The creak of floorboards, the shift of her body as she paced or tried to sleep. Once, he heard her crying through the walls. Not loud sobs, just the quiet kind. The kind a person releases when no one's supposed to hear. He didn't ask her about the father. Didn't ask where she'd come from. He didn't need to know. Whatever trail she'd been dragged down before she ended up on that platform, it had left enough scars on her face to tell him she hadn't had much kindness. Once, about 2 weeks in, she joined him on the porch. He was sipping coffee, dog curled up at his feet. She sat down in the old rocker without a word. "You sleeping okay?" he asked. She shrugged. "You want the doc to come check you out?" "No," she said, quick and sharp, then added, "I'm fine." He nodded. The silence returned, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was a shared quiet. Two people who knew that words weren't always useful. She eventually asked, "Why'd you buy me?" Caleb looked out at the fields. "Don't know," he said. "Guess I couldn't stomach watching what was happening. Something in your eyes said you still had fight in you. Figured someone ought to make sure that fire didn't go out." She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was so soft he almost missed it. "I ain't never had anyone stand up for me before. You do now." They didn't speak again that evening, but from that day on, she started joining him on the porch more often. Sometimes she'd feed the chickens. Other days, she sat under the cottonwood tree and read an old book she found in the study. Her belly grew. Her ankles swelled. The baby kicked, and she started to talk to it sometimes. Unaware, Caleb was listening from around the barn corner. "You're going to be strong," she whispered, "and no one's ever going to trade you like you don't matter." One stormy night in late September, thunder rolled in, deep and low. Caleb was tending to the horses when he heard her scream from the house. He ran in, heart hammering. Upstairs, he found her on the floor, hands gripping the bedpost, her dress soaked with sweat and amniotic fluid. "It's coming," she gasped. "The baby, it's—" Caleb didn't hesitate. He delivered calves, not humans, but life was life. He boiled water, brought towels, steadied her through the pain. Hours passed. Lightning split the sky. She screamed, cursed, begged, cried. He held her hand and told her she could do it. When the baby finally came, small and red and wailing, Caleb felt something inside him break open. Iris held the child to her chest, crying harder than she had in weeks. "A boy. You did good," Caleb whispered. "You both did." She looked up at him with those steel-gray eyes, softened now. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He reached out and gently brushed a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "I told you," he said. "You've got someone standing up for you now." The boy's name was Daniel. Iris named him after no one in particular. She simply liked the way it sounded when she whispered it to her belly in the quiet hours before dawn. He came into the world angry and strong, lungs fierce, eyes wide and blue as Wyoming's summer sky. And somehow, with his first breath, something in the house shifted. It had always been quiet, peaceful but cold. After Daniel, warmth seemed to trickle in through the walls like sunlight after a long winter. The birth had not changed Caleb Wren overnight, but it left a mark. In the weeks that followed, he remained quiet, careful, but present. He fixed the fence post by day and checked the heating line at night to make sure the upstairs room stayed warm enough. When Daniel cried in the early morning, Caleb was often the first to knock gently on Iris's door, a mug of warm milk in one hand, an extra blanket in the other. Iris, to her own surprise, began to laugh again. It came in small pieces, a soft chuckle when Daniel sneezed like a kitten, a reluctant grin when Caleb grumbled at a stubborn rooster. There was healing in the rhythm of the ranch. The feedings, the changing skies, the clatter of horseshoes on dirt. The land asked everything of you, but in return, it gave back things you didn't know you needed. Like peace, like purpose. Iris found a strange kind of sanctuary in the very work she'd never been allowed to do before. Her mother had barked orders and swung belts. But here, Caleb offered no commands, just quiet gestures, handing her gloves, showing her how to muck a stall, or to find the clover field that made the best rabbit forage. Her hands toughened, her back straightened, and every night, Daniel fell asleep in a house full of clean air, warm firelight, and love no one dared speak out loud. Caleb, for his part, tried not to get too close. He'd lost before. Once, there had been a woman, Anna, his wife, his only love. She died during childbirth, both she and their baby girl gone within hours. He had buried them beneath the cottonwood tree that now shaded Iris when she read Daniel's stories in the summer sun. After that, Caleb stopped speaking to the world, built fences taller than they needed to be, turned in on himself like a blade kept sheathed too long. But Iris cracked something open. Not with flirtation, there was none of that between them, not yet, but with resilience, with her unwillingness to break. She was fire with a mother's heart. Caleb admired her from a respectful distance, and sometimes, when she wasn't looking, he let himself smile. Autumn deepened, then gave way to early snows. The nights turned colder, and the ranch began to feel like a cocoon. Iris and Daniel stayed mostly indoors, though she insisted on taking the baby outside once a day, bundled up like a puffball, to introduce him to the world. Caleb thought it was nonsense, but he built her a windbreak anyway, so she could sit on the porch with him without the breeze biting at his cheeks. One evening, as the first snow fell in slow spirals, Caleb came in to find Iris humming to Daniel while folding laundry by the fire. She didn't see him at first, and for a long moment, he simply watched. This girl who had once stood silent on an auction block, singing a lullaby like her heart had never been broken. "You sing pretty," he said, stepping in. Iris jumped slightly, then smiled. "Don't flatter me. I know I'm off-key. It's not the tune that matters." She looked at him for a moment. "You never talk about your past." "No reason to." "I think there is." He took off his hat and sat across from her. Daniel gurgled from the cradle beside the hearth. "Lost my wife in childbirth," he said flatly. "Years ago. Wasn't anyone's fault. Just bad luck." "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. Her name was Anna. She wanted a girl. Picked the name Lily. Didn't get to hold her. I buried them both under the cottonwood. Iris's eyes softened. She reached out, touched his hand without hesitation. "I know you think this is temporary," she said. "Me and Daniel being here. But it doesn't have to be." Caleb didn't pull his hand away, but he didn't answer. She let go after a moment and went back to folding a small onesie. That winter was the hardest the region had seen in a decade. Blizzards came down hard and fast, cutting off roads, freezing pipes, and wiping out smaller ranches who hadn't prepared. But Caleb had always been ready for hardship. He kept extra stores, dried meat, firewood in sheds buried deep enough the winds couldn't scatter them. Iris learned to tend a livestock even in thigh-deep snow. She carried Daniel wrapped to her chest, protected by layers of wool and leather, as she helped Caleb dig out the chicken coop or warm the barn animals through the worst nights. At Christmas, they didn't exchange gifts, but Caleb carved a small wooden horse and left it on Iris's windowsill. She found it the next morning, smiled quietly, and didn't speak of it. A week later, she sewed him a new scarf, dark green, thick, warm, and left it folded on the porch swing. Something unspoken grew between them. They were not lovers. Not yet. Not in the way townsfolk whispered they must be. But something was growing, strong and rooted, beneath the snow. In the spring, the town started talking. People had let it pass in the fall, curious but silent. They figured Iris was a cousin, a drifter, someone Caleb had taken in temporarily. But when she showed up with the baby to buy feed and sugar, riding beside Caleb on a sturdy brown mare, rumors took root. "That girl's too young for him. She was pregnant when he got her, you know. Some say he bought her." That true. The local preacher's wife crossed the street to avoid Iris. At the general store, no one offered to hold Daniel while she bagged flour. Caleb saw it all, heard the way their names rolled through the town like gossip through a crack in a church wall. "I don't care what they say," Iris told him once. "They never knew what I came from. I'm not leaving." Caleb believed her, but it still made his hands clench into fists at night. Late that spring, something shifted again, this time more subtly. Daniel had started crawling, then walking, with the fierce determination of a boy raised on wide-open land. He toddled after chickens, threw clumps of dirt at the dog, and babbled to horses like they were old friends. Caleb would catch himself watching the boy, his chest pulling tight in ways he didn't understand. One afternoon, Iris handed Caleb the boy without warning. "Hold him," she said. "He knows your voice. He smiles when he sees you." Caleb hesitated. "I don't," he started. "Just try." The boy squealed in his arms, delighted by the ride. Caleb held him awkwardly, as if afraid he might break, but Daniel laughed, a sweet, pure sound. Caleb's fingers tightened around the child's waist, and something long buried began to thaw. That night, Iris found Caleb sitting beside the fire, staring into the flames, Daniel asleep in his arms. She didn't say anything, just sat down beside them and leaned her head on his shoulder. Neither of them moved for a long, long time. Summer brought new life and new tension. The crops were good. The animals thrived. Iris started selling homemade preserves to neighbors who came to the ranch by horse or wagon, drawn by curiosity and, perhaps, a hint of guilt over their judgment. But peace never lasts untouched. It came one hot afternoon, a knock on the front door, and the last voice either of them wanted to hear. Iris's mother, dressed in a dusty blue dress, hair tied back like a frontier widow, she stood on the porch like she had a right to be there. Her face wore a smile that never reached her eyes. "Well, well," she said, "ain't this the picture of a happy home?" Iris froze. Caleb stepped in front of her without thinking. "What the hell do you want?" he asked. "I want my grandson," the woman said. "And my daughter, too. She's underage. I got every right to take her back." "You sold her," Caleb said. She sneered. "Ain't no proof of that." Iris's fists balled at her sides. Her voice came out steady, sharp. "You're not taking him. Or me. You think the law's going to side with a man who bought a pregnant girl off a platform?" The woman spat. "People saw it. You think they won't talk when I bring this to court?" "I dare you to try," Caleb said. "And if you so much as breathe near this boy, I'll bury you beside the last wolf that crossed this land." She left in a huff, but the threat lingered like smoke in the house for days. Caleb spoke with the sheriff. Quietly, discreetly. He hired a lawyer out of Cheyenne. Iris, meanwhile, filed paperwork, declaring herself an independent adult, citing abandonment, building a case that would stand if challenged. But it wasn't over, because deep down, Caleb feared one thing more than courts, more than gossip, that one day, Iris might choose to leave anyway. Not out of fear, not out of threat, but because she deserved more than what he could offer. A man with a broken past, a ranch full of ghosts, and a heart sealed behind a wall so high, even he rarely heard it beat. And yet, each night, Iris stayed. Each morning, she smiled. Each time Daniel said, it was Caleb he reached for. By late summer, the cottonwood tree had grown fuller, the earth rich and green around its base. Iris often sat there with Daniel, watching the wind ripple the leaves. One day, Caleb joined her. She looked at him and said, "I don't want to go anywhere." He swallowed hard. "Even if the courts come calling." She nodded. "Even then." He hesitated. "And if I told you that I don't want to lose either of you?" She smiled. "Then I'd say you're a little slow on the uptake." He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't let go. The days on the ranch fell into a peaceful rhythm, each one a little softer, a little fuller than the last. The woman, her name was Clara, had come to life in a way that surprised even herself. Where once there was only fear and confusion in her eyes, now there was purpose. Each morning, she'd wake with the sunrise, wrap the child in a soft wool blanket, and meet James outside by the corral. And James, once a man of hard silences, found his days suddenly filled with laughter, questions, and tiny footsteps chasing chickens across the dirt yard. But peace as it tends to do in stories like these, was fragile. Clara had told James only fragments of her past. The unwanted pregnancy, the shame, the night her mother struck a bargain with a stranger for coin and disappeared by dawn. She never spoke of the father, and James never asked. Some wounds don't take kindly to being reopened. Still, James could sense there was something coming, like the smell of rain long before the clouds arrived. It was late spring when they came. Two riders, lean and dusty, crested the ridge overlooking James' land as the sun dipped low and threw long shadows across the plain. James saw them from the porch, rocking the toddler to sleep, and his jaw tightened. These weren't neighbors. These weren't men who rode just to pass the time. James handed the child to Clara, brushing her cheek with the back of his hand. "Get inside," he said, voice flat. Clara looked out toward the ridge and went pale. "James, I think I know them." James gave a curt nod. He stepped down from the porch, loosened the rifle hanging by the doorframe, and stood in the dirt, waiting. Dust kicked up as the riders approached. The taller of the two wore a pistol slung too low on his hip, the kind of man who'd been itching for a fight most of his life. The other was younger, nervous, eyes scanning the property like he was already plotting his exit. When they pulled up their horses, the taller man spat into the dirt. "You James Callahan?" "I am." The man nodded toward the house. "We're here for the girl." James didn't flinch. "You'll leave the way you came." The second man, clearly less composed, shifted in his saddle. "Look, mister, we don't want trouble. We were sent for her. Her mother's changed her mind. Says she was swindled. Wants her daughter and the baby back." James didn't blink. "She was bought like livestock. If your boss wants to speak about regret, tell her I've got the contract. Signed and sealed." The tall man chuckled, pulling his coat back to show the butt of his pistol. "Thing is, Callahan, some folks don't believe in paper the way they believe in bullets." James rested his hand on the rifle, thumb brushing the stock. "I wouldn't test your luck." Before more words could be exchanged, the door creaked behind James. Clara stepped out. The child clutched her chest. "Leave," she said softly. "I'm not going back." The two men exchanged glances, then turned their horses. "This ain't over," the tall one called over his shoulder. James didn't lower his rifle until there were specks on the horizon. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The past she had buried had clawed its way back to the surface. James lit a lantern and joined her on the porch, where she sat rocking the child in silence. "I thought I could forget it all," she said. "That if I just stayed here long enough, it would all disappear." James looked out into the dark. "Some things follow you, no matter how far you run. But you're not alone now." She turned to him, tears brimming. "You don't know what she's like. My mother doesn't stop. She sees the child as property, leverage. She's going to come herself next time. And she won't be alone." James nodded slowly. "Then we'll be ready." The following weeks were filled with preparation. James, no stranger to danger, reinforced the house, taught Clara how to shoot, and kept a close eye on the hills. He rode into town under the pretense of trading livestock, but visited the sheriff instead. Unfortunately, justice in that part of the country was often slow and easily bought. The sheriff sympathized, but made it clear, without a court decree, Clara's mother could claim the child was taken unlawfully. It was a bureaucratic noose just tight enough to strangle hope. So James made a choice. He began writing letters to distant family, to a lawyer he once knew in Abilene, and most importantly, to a judge he'd worked for during his Army days. He included everything: the bill of sale, the circumstances, even a notarized statement from Clara. It was risky. If the letters never reached their destination, if the judge didn't care, or if Clara's mother had more influence than they knew, it could all backfire. But James believed in the law, even when it limped behind injustice. And then, one golden morning, as the sun crept across the plains and set the fields ablaze with light, the miracle came. Not in the form of a letter or a cavalry of marshals, but in Clara's scream from the kitchen. James rushed in, heart pounding, to find Clara gripping the edge of the table, water pooled at her feet. The baby was coming. The day was chaos, pain, sweat, and prayer. James had helped birth calves and colts, but never a child. Clara's cries filled the house, the walls echoing with a symphony of strength and fear. James did all he could, boiled water, cleaned cloths, whispered encouragement with trembling hands. By nightfall, with stars blooming in the sky, the cries of a newborn filled the ranch. A girl. Clara held her close, whispering the name Grace through exhausted sobs. James sat at the edge of the bed, tears trailing down the dust on his cheeks. It was the first time Clara had seen him cry. But peace, as always, didn't last. 3 days after Grace's birth, the riders returned, this time with 4 others, all armed, and one older woman seated in a buggy, her face sharp as frost. Clara froze at the window. "She's here," she whispered. "My mother." James kissed her forehead, then strapped on his revolver and stepped outside. The woman didn't waste time. "Where's my daughter? Where's the child?" "You've no claim here," James said. "You bought her like a cow, you mean?" the woman hissed. "You think a sack of coins makes you her master? I birthed her. I raised her. That child belongs to me. She belongs to no one." The woman stepped down from the buggy, gloved hands trembling with rage. "Then I'll take this to court. You'll lose your land, your livestock, everything." James took a deep breath. "Already filed. You'll find Judge Howard's signature on every paper. The birth certificate's in Clara's name. And the lawyer coming down from Abilene? He'll make sure no one forgets how you sold your own daughter like stock." The woman's eyes went wide. "You might win in a crooked town like this," James continued, voice like stone. "But I'll drag this fight into every courtroom that'll listen. And I promise you, every truth you try to bury will come crawling out." For a long moment, the world stood still. Then, with a bitter shriek, the woman turned on her heel and stormed back to her buggy. Her men followed. One glanced back at James with something close to respect. Then they rode off, swallowed by dust and distance. That night, as James sat on the porch with baby Grace nestled against his chest, Clara joined him with 2 mugs of warm cider. "She's gone," Clara said softly. "For now," James replied. "But you're not going anywhere." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "You saved us." James looked down at the tiny life in his arms. "No, you saved me." The ranch, once a monument to loneliness, had become something new, something sacred. It rang with laughter and lullabies, the sound of small feet racing across wooden floors, the clink of spoons and mugs, and the lowing of cattle in the dusk. James, the lonely rancher who had lived only for his land, had found more than a family. He'd found his miracle.